This is a Mesa Stiletto Duece, which essentially was their take on an EL34 based amp. It still has a lot of the classic Mesa characteristics going on, and I want to show you guys some of the tones that you can pull from this thing. To me, this is like Mesa's take on a classic JCM 800 style circuit. It has a little bit of that like rectifier thing going on in there, where on the back you can choose between solid state and tube rectification, as well as the recto style bold and spongy switch, which very conveniently is on the front of this amp. It's also got solo and effects loop output control, kind of like the rectifier again. Essentially, it's if you're used to playing a recto and you're a recto guy, but you want a Marshall tone, this is the amp. This is the Mesa amp that you should try out anyway, and they definitely marketed it in that kind of way. To me, this almost has a bit of that 90s Metallica thing when they were blending rectos and Marshalls in the studio, and it's almost like that sound in a box. So, quick overview, you've got two channels, which is nice and simple. Channel 1, which lights up blue, has 3 different modes. You've got a fat clean, a tight clean, and a crunch. And then on channel 2, you have crunch, which sounds different to the channel 1 crunch. I'll show you that in a second. You've got a tight gain, which is my favorite, and then you've got a fluid drive. I'm guessing, you know, like a solo kind of channel. So that is, yeah, and obviously, you know, bass, middle, treble presence, master volume in each channel, and gain on each channel. It's pretty simple. On the back, there's the usual Mesa stuff with lots of different switches and stuff like that, but I'm going to show you a bunch of different clips where I swap between tube and solid state rectification and the bold and spongy. But to highlight the Marshall style characteristics, I'm going to leave it on solid state rectification on the bold mode. That'll be the first part of the video, and then we'll swap over to the same sounds with tube rectification, and then we'll have a look at what the bold and spongy switches do. Let's get into it. And for all of these clips, I'm going to be using my Greco. It has a Gibson Dirty Fingers humbucker in the bridge, the stock pickup in the neck. It's had a pretty extensive overhaul by MT Guitars. It's got new jumbo frets and a compound radius on it, so it's yeah, it's a real kind of chunk machine. And it looks cool. It looks just like a Les Paul custom, which is why I got it. Anyway, let's have a listen to some of the sounds out of this thing. Okay, here is the fat clean setting. I've got the bass and mid at around, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and then I've got the treble at 1 o'clock, the gain at halfway, and the presence at halfway. I'm on the 50 watt mode. It sounds like this. And if we gain that up a little bit, it immediately gives you a little bit more vibe. So you can kind of use it for that creamy sort of blues tone with the gain all the way up. Kind of gets nice and saggy. And then the best way to use this mode is to use the spongy switch down, and then I'm going to turn the amp off so I don't blow it up, and I will put it over to tube rectification while it powers up, and this is going to give it more sag basically. And to me it's almost got like a Bassman JTM 45 kind of thing going on at these settings. And the nice thing about that is you can then crank the master in 50 watt mode. It's really nice. So there we go. Let's try it on the tight clean sound. Even though it's not clean at the moment, it sounds like this. And again, that's got slightly more of the classic Marshall or Fender Bassman style crunch going on. It almost sounds to me like the difference between when you're on a Plexi or a JTM 45, the difference between the high treble input, which is very bright and has a bright capping gauge, and the normal input kind of being bassier. So that's what that does. If we go to bold, actually let's leave it at spongy on the tube rectification. I'll just bring the gain down a little bit, and even though this is a really high output guitar, you've got plenty of clean headroom going on. So that's the tight clean. My favorite sound on this though is easily the crunch channel. If we use the same settings, but I might just bring the bass up to about halfway and push the mids to 6, we get way more of your Marshall Plexi early 2203 thing happening. What I'm going to do is turn the presence control down a little bit, actually quite a lot. I'm going to take it from about 3 o'clock to about 11 o'clock. And with the gain at about 3 o'clock, it sounds like this. And if you want more of the old school Marshall kind of thing, I would recommend leaving it on spongy and leaving it on the tube rectification settings. If we do the opposite and we go bold and we go to solid state rectification, sounds like this. I'm just going to turn the master down a little bit. I'm still on the 50 watt mode. We'll have a listen to the difference between 50 and 100 in a second. This is what we get. This is sort of more your 2203 territory. And if we bring the treble down, say, to about 11 o'clock there and really push the mids, it smooths out a lot more. I'm going to take the gain all the way up to 100%. We get this. Which is really lovely to play lead guitar with. The difference between the 50 watt mode and the 100 watt mode, I'll normalize the audio in post. This is 50. It's pretty subtle, but the 100 watt mode is definitely a little bit tighter. This is with the gain cranked all the way up. So that is channel 1. Channel 2 basically picks up where channel 1 left off. If we start on the crunch mode, and what I'm going to do is I'll set the treble at noon, middle at noon, and bass at noon, which is, you don't have to do that to make the amp sound neutral or natural or anything. And I'm going to leave the master at around 11 o'clock. Let's just have a listen to how that sounds on the crunch mode. And I'm sure someone out there is watching going, oh, why are you playing lame AC/DC riffs through a Mesa? But, when I hear that sound, I want to hear Malcolm Young kind of stuff happening, so... Right, so to me that sounds like it needs a little bit of a push in the bass and the mids, and I'll back the treble off a little bit just to kind of get a little bit more vintage sounding, even though I'm using vintage 30s. And then we can push the gain, say, to about 2 o'clock. Sounds like this. And that, to me, is very close to my ideal kind of rock sound. It might be a little bit too saturated, so I'd back the gain off a little bit, and we get this. And if we put it on spongy mode, it sounds really good. It changes the feel more than anything else to me, so I think I like the bold mode a little bit more. And what I will do is, I can't even remember which rectification setting we're on, so I'm going to take a quick look at that. So yeah, there's more of the dual rectifier thing happening when we've got the tube rectification going on there. I think there's a kind of a cool mix of vintage and modern. You have the bold switch up, so it's still tight, but then you use tube rectification, so you get a bit more sag. Let's go to the tight gain channel, because that's my favorite on the amp, with the same settings. And now with tube rectification on, we get this. If I pull the gain up even more and pull out some mid-range, we're getting into that sort of mid-90s Metallica territory. I'll bump the presence a little bit as well. I find with this amp you've got to be kind of careful with the presence control and the speakers you're using. I'm using V30s at the moment, so I'm trying not to push the presence too hard because it gets pretty ice-picky otherwise. This is the scoop mids and more gain thing. And that sounds thick. If you want it tighter, you can go over to solid state rectification. If you want it, looser, leave it on tube rectification, hit the spongy switch, you get this. Probably the closest it gets to the dual rec, I think, are those settings. If we do the opposite, we'll go to bold, and I'll turn the amp off, and we'll switch over to solid state rectification. It's way tighter, way more aggressive, kind of like a boosted JCM 800, which is why a lot of people like these amps, I guess. Alright, I got there in the end with the pinch harmonic. And then over to the fluid drive, this has a totally different character. I feel like the crunch mode on channel 1 and the crunch mode and the tight drive mode on channel 2 sound pretty similar, and they feel pretty similar to play. But this fluid drive mode, if I take, I'm going to leave everything where it is to start with, sounds like this. And that's kind of cool. That gets squishy way quicker. It's nice for lead stuff, but it's kind of not as cool for really savage rhythm guitar stuff. If you crank the gain and back the treble off and really pile on the mid-range, backing a bit of bass off, leaving the presence where it is, which is at about 11 o'clock at the moment, you get this. Which I think are kind of the ideal settings for that particular sound. You can also go spongy, which gives you this. Which I don't like as much on this mode. The other thing, if you want to make the amp even tighter, what I would recommend on, let's go back to my favorite sound, the tight gain. So we'll sit it on tight gain, I'm going to pull out some mid-range, I'm going to boost some bass, I'll leave the presence where it is, leave the master where it is, we'll get the treble up to about 1 o'clock. This is on 50 watt mode. We'll go to bold, sounds like this, just to jog your memory. Then if you chuck it over to 100 watt mode, and I can never remember where we are with the rectification, the crows are obviously enjoying it outside. We are on silicon diodes. So super tightness, leave it on 100 watt mode, silicon diodes, bold mode, tight gain, get the gain up around 3 o'clock. I've got treble at 1 o'clock, mid at 11 o'clock, bass at 1 o'clock. I might actually push the bass to about 2 o'clock. Presence at 9 o'clock, master at 10 or 11 o'clock. This is sort of the tight high gain sound that you want out of this amp. Keep in mind we're not boosting this with any drive pedals either. It's super tight. It sounds great with a boost, but I sort of don't feel the need to use it with this amp. And then the other really vibey sound with this amp is, we'll go back to tube rectification, and we'll sit it on bold mode, but we'll sit on the 50 watt mode and push the master a little bit on this one. And this kind of has all the things I like about the Marshall DSL, which is one of my favorite amps, with a little bit of that sort of Mesa Boogie dual rectifier thing thrown in there. Or, you know, if you don't want to use the DSL as a reference point, think modded 2-203. With extended low end, this is my favorite sound in the Stiletto. Hopefully this demo has given you some ideas about what it can and what it can't do. And they're a real sleeper amp. They're kind of like the Marshall Vintage Modern, where those amps came out, they were appealing to a very particular demographic, and they weren't as successful as some of the other lines, but they're great sounding amps. So the Stiletto, this is a Stiletto Juice. This is a sound I like out of it with a twin humbucker guitar. After this clip, I'll go grab a boost and chuck it in front of this. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, hit the subscribe button. You can check out some of my music online if you search Ragdoll Back to Zero. You guys have been great. I'm Leon. Here's a final riff through the Mesa Stiletto Juice. other thing I like about Mesas are they smell really good. Here it is with the SD1 as a boost.